Support for In the Frame, Exploring the DIA is provided by Masco Corporation Foundation. Masco is a global manufacturer of home improvement and building products.
Hello, and welcome to In the Frame, Exploring the DIA. Artists have always drawn animals. In fact, some of the oldest works of art we have, the cave paintings, show animals with amazing accuracy. The exhibition, It's a Zoo in Here, draws upon the DIA's print collection to show the many, many ways that artists have depicted animals going back to the 1400s. Acting as your guide today is Nancy Soiker, the organizer of the exhibition, who's head of the Department of Prints, Drawings and Photographs and the curator of Prints and Drawings.
It's a Zoo in Here, Prints and Drawings of Animals. In concept is a very simple show, but I hope the title speaks to the diversity of the prints and drawings in the show, and also the kind of profundity of creatures we see in the galleries, as well as to the artists and all the cultures that look to animals for subject matter. The show does consist of 171 prints and drawings. It might be the largest show the department ever organized from the collection. If it's not the largest show, it's the second largest. And indeed, it just came from the idea of doing a show about animals. But what it speaks to is the depth and breadth of the DI collection, that we could primarily select artists from America, Europe, and Asia. The earliest piece in the show is Albrecht Dürer's drawing of a lion from the 1490s, and we have other works of art that were created within the last couple of years. So it is quite an amazing show, and does include artists like Picasso and Matisse and Degas, and it goes just on and on, also as well with local artists and national artists as well. So it's a big show that I hope will attract many audiences and have a lot of fun for all viewers coming to see it. Grace Hardigan used a very simple technique to do this watercolor called Fish and Ships. There aren't many abstract works of art in the show. This is one of the few. Some of the works are just straightforward depictions of animals. Others are more complicated kinds of symbolic, allegorical, metaphoric kinds of looks at animals. But for Fish and Ships, all Hardigan did was make a watercolor as she wished to. But then the interesting thing that she did, it's so simple and yet it's so effective, she tore up that watercolor and then recombined it in these kind of abstracted parts to create a whole new composition. And you can just see too that what she used was sketch pad paper. You can just see how she tore it out of a spiral notebook right here and incorporated that kind of natural aspect of the paper into the composition. So again, you too at home could make this work of art tonight. All you need is a sheet of paper, some watercolors, and feel free to tear it up. This grouping of 6 prints or 5 prints and 1 drawing is a wonderful example of what's possible in this exhibition. It combines the works of art of the 16th century through the 20th century by artists from many countries. And it also shows you how we could multiple hang in this show. So what we're focusing on in this case is a woodcut that was made in Germany in 1534, and it's called Group of 7 Wild Horses. And below it is a lithograph made by Eugene Delacroix in the early 19th century, and the same title, Wild Horse. So the way it speaks to artists from different countries, different times, picking up the same subject is so interesting. And in the Delacroix lithograph, you can see a kind of movement and energy. And interestingly enough, when this woodcut was made in 1534, it was also recognized as a remarkable work of art, because in 1534, the realism and energy and movement of this piece were thought to be quite spectacular. So it's a fun kind of comparison that we try to do over and over in the exhibition, in speaking to a kind of universality about the animal subject in art. The Stegall Rivera lithograph is one of the very interesting works in the show and has a kind of possible local folklore kind of story attached to it. Rivera is one of the better represented artists in the exhibition. There's at least 2 prints and 2 drawings. This particular lithograph is a new acquisition for the DIA. We just purchased it in the last year or so. And who's represented is Emilio Zapata, the Mexican revolutionary general and leader of the Mexican revolt in the early 20th century. And it's a subject that Rivera had used previously, had used it in mural painting in Mexico. And the Museum of Modern Art in New York also owns a portable mural of this subject. But the story of the making of this lithograph is quite fantastic. It was Rivera who was in New York in the 1930s, in early 1932, because the Museum of Modern Art was giving him a retrospective exhibition. And while he was in New York, his New York dealer said, "Hey, I think you can make prints, and you should make prints." And Rivera worked with Miller, a wonderful master printmaker in New York, to make lithographs. But as the story goes, it's not even a story. We have this documented in letters from the dealer. When Rivera left New York to come to Detroit to work on the murals upstairs in the DIA, this edition was not finished of this image. The letters say that some of the prints had to be sent to Detroit for Rivera to sign and number. So it's a wonderful possibility that in 1932, when he came here to work on our great murals upstairs, a packet of these prints were sent to him. And it's quite possible that he signed this edition of 100 prints literally across the street. And it wasn't now until 2010 that this print has returned to Detroit, and we now have it. The other interesting thing is that Rivera only made 12 lithographs in his lifetime, and until very recently we only had 1, and now we are working toward acquiring the prints of this incredibly important artist to our collection. Rounding out this installation of 6 images, these 2 wonderful lithographs by the 20th century artist John Steuart Curry. And again, it just speaks to what we could do with the installation, where here we have 2 images by an artist very well known in the American Midwest, rounding out the selection. Interestingly enough, it is the horse who is the best represented animal in the show, and I think that surprised a lot of us. I think we're all expecting it to be the dog. But also this wall speaks to how the show's arranged. You do begin with an awful lot of horses, and then you do segue into a section of perhaps birds, and then literally perhaps a section of cows and cats. But we also have thematic sections in the show, a few. But here's again, Curry did this lithograph in 1938 and this one in 43, so you can see that active barnyard scenes were something that interested him as much as it did Delacroix in the mid-19th century or Hans Baldwin in the 16th century in Germany. The 2 engravings by Durer of different horses, both are from 1505, and both are wonderful, but one is truly extraordinary. And what you have with the large horse below the small horse is kind of naturalistic horse, an everyday horse, kind of work horse with a kind of sway back and very odd proportions. But what you have above it is the perfect horse. Durer was actually composing a book on perspective, and it was not only about perfect proportion for human beings, but it was also perfect proportion for animals. And this was going to be his illustration for the perfect horse. And he intentionally made the large horse as a contrast to it, too. Let's not call it the imperfect horse, but literally a visual comparison of 2 different types of proportion systems. The one on top, the small horse, is the truly remarkable one because it is 1505. And it speaks to how well a work of art can look when it is well taken care of. And it's pretty close to what Durer wanted it to look like in 1505, where the sheet of paper is relatively white, and it contrasts beautifully with these crisp, rich, black engraved lines. So despite the more than 500 years of age on this sheet of paper, it still can hold up wonderfully if it's well taken care of. And here indeed, we do have a masterful example by one of the best printmakers who ever lived. And again, working into our simple little show about animals.
These exuberantly colourful prints are by Matisse at the end of his career. Extraordinary works that are really about colour. In fact, I personally have difficulties really seeing what's going on in here. The top one is Pierrot's funeral. This is called the wolf, and this is the horse, the rider, and the clown. You can make out the hearse with the horses pulling it. Perhaps that's Pierrot, that white bit in the middle. But I have to say, I really have a hard time finding a wolf in this particular image. And down here I can see the horse, but not much evidence of the clown or the rider. But that isn't really what this is about. This is Matisse, the great colorist of the 20th century, working with intense color using a very arduous technique called pochoir, a kind of stencil that allows him to get these amazingly vibrant effects.
Jane Hammond has been making maps with butterflies on them for a number of years. And this large piece, I think, is a wonderful summation of everything the exhibition is about. The butterfly basically is a wonderful symbol about both the transience and endurance of life. The place is actually Africa, and every one of these maps Jane titles All Souls, and then the name of the place. This is All Souls Zungaru, and Zungaru is a place that has known many people over an awful lot of time. Over 1,000 years ago, it was a place where Arabs lived or traded, and it's also a place, of course, with its own native African culture. It's a place that was colonized by the British. It's a place that has an awful lot of American influence. And so it is a land that has known many people over an awful lot of time and under lots of conditions. And the butterfly is wonderful in being the nomadic creature that it is, the creature that travels along routes. And of course, when you look at the map, you do feel as though you see rivers or, again, roads and that kind of suggestion. And also, this incredibly delicate creature is so strong and so capable of such hardship. And so in all that summation, also Zungaro speaks beautifully to art and craft and also the human condition that I hope the show is a summation of, that regardless of time period or place, it's interesting the way people have looked to animals to speak about life. Hammond's technique for this piece is unbelievably intricate and time-consuming. The map itself is created from layers and layers of paper that have been attached, and you can see that she's painted on them with a variety of pigments and created the map itself. The butterflies are absolutely fascinating. Jane is collecting butterflies, and actually what she does is send away to a butterfly mail order house. The butterfly comes in a cellophane wrapper, and the wings are folded together. The first thing Jane does is steam the butterfly and open it up into the position she wants it in. After about a day of drying, what she does is photograph that butterfly, both top and bottom, and feed that into a computer. And so the computer spits out the printed butterfly, both top and bottom. Jane, it's on white paper. Jane doesn't like the visible white edge of the paper, so she literally paints the edge of every butterfly so it appears more naturalistic. Then she uses a combination of glues and rice paper to mold every body. and she uses horsehair for the antennas, and then to even give it a more realistic look, she dabs the end of every antenna with a little bit of paint. In a couple of places you can see that the antennas are made out of false eyelashes, but every single butterfly is basically an enlargement or reduction of one butterfly. So it's particularly, if you look at the green butterflies, you can see it's the same butterfly. And every butterfly is indeed a species in the real world except for one. For the large butterflies in the middle that have black polka dots on them, that's a Photoshop butterfly. What Jane did was feed in these white butterflies, you see about 4 of them along this left edge, and in the computer she colored that butterfly red. So that is the only not real butterfly, but then she did take liberties, and when you see the map in person, you can take a look at perhaps the brown butterflies in the upper center and see how they are enlargements or reductions of the same butterfly. And it's a wonderful game to play, but it speaks to the crazy hard work involved in the making of art and the willingness to cut and roll and dab and place all these fine components to make this wonderfully somewhat 3D kind of drawing, but a very complicated one indeed. The oldest work of art in the show is Albert Durer's little watercolor of the lion. It was done in the mid-1490s. And of course, there's so many questions and answers, actually, that this little drawing presents to us. Of course, the one question is, where the heck did the German artist Albert Durer ever see a lion? And it speaks wonderfully to the time period. Durer lived in Nuremberg, Germany, but eventually he traveled to Italy extensively, and he was collected all around Europe, in England, in the Netherlands, of course in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, and even further east. But when you do take a close look at the lion and focus in on his face, suddenly, in about 3 seconds, perhaps you're thinking about the Wizard of Oz, because there is certainly probably no lion in the world that ever looked like that, except on a Hollywood set. So we don't know exactly what Durer was attempting to tell us with this lion, if he is indeed an image of the imagination, or if any way he reflects a creature that Durer actually saw. But also, in focusing on the lion technically, what you gain by just slowly looking at the work of art is the tremendous skill of the artist. This is a very tiny work of art, obviously, but when you think of every line, every stroke, the delicacy of the hand of the artist and the control that he exercised to create this absolutely marvelous little suggestion of a lion is quite wonderful. And again, he did it in the mid-1490s. Charles Culver is the best represented artist in the show. There are 6 works of his on display, and he is a Michigan artist. In fact, he's Detroit's own. He was trained in Chicago, but it was here in Detroit that he made his career. And it was by the 1930s that he was showing extensively, and he had a great run for 10 years at least, teaching at what is now the College for Creative Studies. And when he died, he was actually a critic for the Detroit newspapers. He was very active here on the scene in Detroit. And not only did he do animals, but he did landscapes and still lifes. And I sort of have this joke that perhaps anybody growing up in Detroit in the 40s, 50s, and even to today probably grew up with a Culver in their home. Charles Culver and his wife eventually bought a property in Bel Air, Michigan, which is just a few miles east of Torch Lake. This Fireflies Torch Lake from 1956 that I'm standing by is probably a scene that Culver saw one night, and one that we're certainly familiar with, and was able to transcribe into this lovely style of his of fireflies playing on the lakeshore. And not only the title says Torch Lake, but there are actually people in the galleries who have a home now on Torch Lake, and they thought they could identify the peninsula that this is. And Culver had a great deal. Making art was basically his reason for living. But of course, what an awful time to begin wanting to make art in the 20s and 30s and certainly be hit by the Depression. So what Culver actually did is have a great deal with both Ford and GM, where his wife would drive him to the train station in Grayling on Monday morning. He'd come down to Detroit and he'd work in the design studio, let's say at GM. And then on Friday, his wife would he'd take the train back, his wife would pick him up, and he would paint on the weekends. And the way he would make it work is he only worked for the 9-to-5 thing at Ford or GM for as long as it took to accumulate money. And then he would take time off to paint. And sometimes this was for painting at a week stretch at a time, sometimes it was for months, but at some points in time, he actually could make it work to take a year off. And in fact, it was with Ford where I believe he designed over 150 covers for a Ford Motor magazine that was given to dealers that they distributed to their clients. So this particular work of art is a gift of the Ford Motor Company. So again, it's a wonderful kind of circular story about time and art and location. And Culver's someone who, as you can well see, had a very wonderful, playful, clever and lively style that was quite the art subject in his day. He might have fallen off our radar screen recently, but certainly undeservedly. It's just wonderful art, and it's sprinkled throughout the galleries. Charles Culver did this huge bumblebee in 1947, and it's simply a wonderful piece. Compositionally, it's a simple idea. Just make something small very big, and you certainly will startle your viewers. Stylistically, too, it's 1947. If you looked at it, you probably couldn't place it in time, so it's another wonderful aspect about it. It's done so rapidly, and one of the beauties is that we could compare it literally with this little pencil drawing by another artist named Walter Stein of a relatively life-size bee. So it's a wonderful, playful thing that we could do. And then because it was such a happy little thing occurring here, we intentionally put the Saul Steinberg little bird cage next to it. All these works of art are from relatively the same period of time, the late 40s, early 50s. And of course, the lovely thing about the Steinberg is that he just felt compelled to use ledger paper as his suggestion of the bird cage. And so in all cases, most of these drawings are inspired by very simple ideas, and yet in the hands of these wonderful artists, they're all just magnificent works of art. And again, because of the depth and breadth of the collection, we could do this kind of interesting threesome that really is a nice little corner of the exhibition.
I have been a member of the DIA since I moved to Detroit about 6 years ago, and I also started volunteering at that time too. I enjoy seeing the museum and have for all the years that I've lived here, and I knew from the beginning that I wanted to volunteer here, and specifically that I wanted to work with the visitors and help them with the experience of seeing the art. So that led me to see what I needed to do to become a volunteer, and it's working out great for me, and I think that the visitors are enjoying seeing the art with me too. The other thing I really, really enjoy at the DIA is the other volunteers that I work with. We work as a real team, and it's just a joy to come down here and join that group and do what we do. The DIA, the Detroit Institute of Art, is such an important part of Detroit. All of the cultural things that we have in this same area, the other museums, we all work cohesively to make art available to the people of Detroit. And art and culture are so important to the real soul of a city. A city has to have its industry, but it also has to have its art. And I'm very proud to work for the museum and do our part to do that for the city of Detroit.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode looking at the many different ways that artists have depicted animals. This may not be the exhibition on view when you come down to the DIA because prints and drawings exhibitions in the Schwartz family galleries change every 4 months or so. For full details on DIA programs, go to dia.org. Till next time, this is Graham Beale, your guide to one of America's great museums, the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Support for In the Frame, Exploring the DIA is provided by Masco Corporation Foundation. Masco is a global manufacturer of home improvement and building products. An encore presentation of In the Frame is available on demand for viewing at DetroitPublicTV.org.